Hello, I'm Katie Robbins Case. I'm one of the practicum specialists at the Grace Abbott School of Social Work. In this video, I'm going to talk about some common stages that you might see your practicum students going through with their skills and their confidence, and some ideas on how to offer beneficial supervision based off of the the skill level that your student is at, as well as talking about how to give appropriate feedback. So first of all, each student is going to have their own unique style and presentation of their skill level, but I'm just going to break them into three general categories and talk about each one a little bit more in depth. So just an FYI, I do talk about some tips in managing various skill levels when doing group supervision in the group supervision training if you want a little bit more about that piece of it. So these are really the three categories I'm going to discuss, and it's really the most basic. So level one encompasses students with the least amount of skill. They often need the most guidance and explanation of concepts and duties. Level two students, they often have some experience, but they're still kind of insecure in their abilities. So they're really trying to figure out that balance between competence and insecurity. So in my opinion, this group, level two group, can often be the most tricky to supervise. And then finally, level three, these are the students that have the most experience, they're confident, and they're secure enough in themselves and their abilities to be vulnerable. So to ask for feedback, and they're really usually pretty good at asking appropriate questions. So these students are great and can typically be challenged a little bit more to look at concepts or ethical issues or whatever it may be just a little bit more deeply. So like I said, these are super general categories, and some students will have no experience, but they'll be really mature and self-aware, so they present a little bit more like a level three, and some students have a ton of experience but very little self-insight, and they're going to present more like a level one or a two. So the information is still valuable, just adapt it as you see fit. So we're going to talk first about level one. So to start out, these students are the newest to the field. Oftentimes they haven't had a job or any professional experience, and they're just really starting from scratch. So these students can be kind of timid and nervous. They might be afraid to try new skills on their own. They're going to ask a lot of questions probably, sometimes multiple times, and they feel very reliant on their supervisor or supervisors. Typically, these students are probably going to need some help interpreting situations that they're a part of just to understand why it had a good outcome or a bad outcome. So, for example, in supervision, it can be really helpful for a student to hear why what they did worked. So if a student comes to supervision and is really excited because they are working with this client, they were able to find a resource that really helped, and the client was just super grateful. And your student is probably feeling great about this. And often this is why they're in the field in the first place, obviously to help people. So you want to praise the student, but also break down what they did can be really helpful. So asking questions like, how did you figure out that this was the right resource for the client? What questions did you ask them, etc. And praising their ability to build good rapport, use active listening, or asking good questions. But it helps the student to see the breakdown of the process of how they interacted with this client led to the conclusion that they wanted. Sometimes that can be really helpful so that they can try to repeat that process if appropriate, or at least build on those skills. So when giving not so positive feedback, it can be also really helpful to break it into steps. So for instance, perhaps your student is coming across as rude to a client when they're coming into your agency. So maybe you hear feedback from other staff members that the student is not engaging with clients. They're just saying, I don't know, when the client has a question, and just not overall being very welcoming to the agency. So this obviously needs to be addressed. But first, it's good to figure out what the student's impression is by asking point blank how they think it's going. When in this example, maybe they're sitting at the front desk of the agency where clients come in or something like that. Give the student an opportunity to state if they're feeling uncomfortable or if they don't recognize how they're coming across. If they're like, oh, it's going really good, I really like it. It kind of gives you some insight into maybe that they don't even know what their behavior is that isn't appropriate. So if they're feeling uncomfortable, addressing why they're uncomfortable and role playing in supervision can be really helpful. Or if they don't see it as an issue, like I said, they're lacking that insight, perhaps giving them some agency expectations in regards to this is what it needs to look like when you meet new clients, or which staff member, identify the staff member that they need to go to when they need help or they don't know an answer. Another suggestion when giving harder feedback, especially about a student's behavior, you can ask the student to do like a role reversal exercise. So ask the student to imagine that they're the client coming into the agency, or even what it was like the very first time they did come into the agency, either for their interview or their first day at practicum, whatever that looks like. Ask them, what was it like? What was it like? How were you greeted? How did you want to be greeted? Did you know the agency? What were you expecting and what was your experience? So allowing the student to understand more from the client's point of view and what they might be needing to feel comfortable and welcomed can help the student relate it back to their actions, especially if they're not understanding why they're doing isn't helpful. So I think that this can be applied to a lot of different situations, but can be helpful to kind of do that role reversal and build some of that empathy up. And it also, getting to this comfort level and kind of understanding why the student was doing what they're doing. Maybe there wasn't a reason, but at least having a plan kind of gives you as a supervisor more of an opportunity to follow up on that behavior, give more specific expectations to that student of, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And if something like this happens, then what's our solution? What do we want to do? Really kind of trying to join with them and figure out some expectations, but give plenty of guidance and suggestions and also encourage them to take that active role in finding solutions. So the big thing though too is this experience is normal, right? We were all new at one time and we all had things to learn. So normalizing those experiences as new social workers and students to help them feel a little bit more comfortable and confident, and also remembering to give that positive feedback as well, to express your confidence in their abilities, to find some things that they are doing really well. Just make sure that you're doing a check-in the next week or whenever you meet, just to make sure that they're implementing the feedback, or let them know how you're going to be checking up. Does that mean talking with another staff member that's going to be at the front desk with them, or whatever that looks like. But just keeping in mind that these are all learning and growing experiences for our students, and it's perfectly okay to have things that aren't going very well right at the beginning and then building on those skills. So if we move on to level 2, these students often have some experience in the field, but are still pretty insecure about their abilities. So they've had some good experiences, but they've also had some bad experiences, and that might be kind of embarrassing, or they're just genuinely unsure about. So these students often come across, obviously they all present a little bit differently, but I think in general they might come across as really confident or have a lot of answers, but they're kind of only half correct, or it kind of seems like maybe they haven't thought it completely through, but they're trying to be confident in what they're saying. So it's sometimes a little bit tricky to give feedback to a student at this level because they're trying really hard to appear competent, and in some ways they really are, and in other ways they really aren't. And so Of course, this is a generalization, and students can express this in a lot of different ways. But this phase of balancing that competence with insecurity is a stage that a lot of people go through. So, um, in my experience in supervision with students at this level two, they might talk around a situation a lot. They might not give a lot of detail about their part in it. For example, I was working with a student who was doing therapy in a clinical setting. And as we were talking about clients, I noticed that this student usually would want to discharge clients after like 5 or 6 sessions and say, well, their symptoms are better, they're using their coping skills, I think that they're done with therapy. And for me, I wanted a little bit more information. So I just started asking the student to break down the sessions, tell me specifically what was said, kind of walk me through. I said a lot of, okay, and then what was your client's reaction to that? And what was your reaction to that, right? So just keep getting the student to keep telling me a little bit more, a little bit more. And what we kind of came to a conclusion was this student was doing a lot of this education and problem solving with the client, but that was about it. This student was really having trouble kind of seeing the next steps in the clinical needs of her clients. So I asked the student how comfortable really they were with the next steps of therapy, so to speak, past the coping skill education part. And the student said, "What do you mean?" Right? So kind of talking around the situation. So I felt like the student was a little bit hesitant admitting some of the insecurities. So I just tried to really normalize the experience because I maybe was seeing something that she wasn't sure how to talk about yet. So I just said, you know, there are a variety of ways to move out of skill building with clients and into the processing phase of therapy. And with all new social workers and therapists, they struggle with this next step because it isn't usually, there's not usually like a roadmap, and it takes a little bit more risk on your part. So it can feel kind of stressful in the moment. And then I also said to this student, what would it be like if we take a closer look at your clients and decide on a few options that you can try in session instead of termination? Because I'm guessing there's probably some more work to do. And now that you have done such a great job of building up their coping skills, your client's probably more able to move on to some bigger stuff because they are able to kind of manage their emotions better. So basically, I just took this leap and just kind of named what I thought the problem was and or kind of the hang up for this student progressing. Of course, it's not always that easy. And this still took kind of a lot of work to coax the student to feel kind of comfortable admitting this weakness. But over time, the student was more and more comfortable coming to supervision and just saying, I don't know where to go from here, and I feel really anxious in session, which is exactly where we want our students to get to, where they're ready to learn and grow and kind of dissect a little bit more the things that they're uncomfortable with in terms of learning and growing. So I think that in my opinion, as the supervisors, it can be really hard to contradict when a student is saying things are going well and you're not 100% sure that they are. So, like I said with level one students, it's really helpful to break it down and ask a lot of why questions. So, have the student explain their rationale so it doesn't feel like you're always correcting behavior or letting it just slide. No one wants to feel like they're messing up. So sometimes I'll even say something like, it sounds like you really did have a lot of success working with this client, but I'm wondering if you try this, right? You might get an even better result. What do you think? So starting off by actually giving some directive or giving some ideas, but still making it sounds like you did a good job. Let's talk about some other options too. Lessens the blow a little bit. So it's not diminishing what they felt proud of, but it's giving some specific ideas for improving their practice. So another tactic that I play, and I'm really upfront with my students when I do this, is just to play devil's advocate and just contradict. Just tell them up front, like, hey, okay, as a learning exercise, I'm just going to play the devil's advocate so that you get really good at understanding and being able to talk about why you did what you did, right? I'll just lay it out like that. So I'll just contradict or take the opposite view as they're talking about it, just so they can really think through the whys of their thoughts or their actions. So I do it in this way, where I'm really upfront about saying I'm going to play the devil's advocate, because then it doesn't feel like I am just sitting here telling them what they did is wrong. We're really having a conversation and joining together about, tell me your rationale for why you did what you did. And if we come up with some ideas of other ways to do it in the process, perfect. It's always better to have more tools in your tool belt than just one or two. So that's really how I talk about it in terms of growth. I also think that level two, students have a really difficult time hearing feedback given unless it's really direct or they can personally understand it. So helping students see the value in feedback to make them better social workers is also helpful. So I like to use a lot of personal examples, maybe where I made a mistake early on in my work, or that I realized in hindsight maybe I should have or could have done something different, or when feedback had been really helpful to me. So I'll even say things just to normalize experience, like it was really embarrassing, or I didn't even realize I was doing it until it was pointed out to me, or something like that, just to show that it's this normal part of learning. And of course, it's super important to continue to praise when they do something good. The hard part sometimes for supervisors is not getting too annoyed, really, to put it bluntly, with the know-it-all, quote unquote, students. And we find it hard to offer a balance of praise and constructive feedback. Often we don't want to. The other side of that is we don't want to hurt our students' feelings. So maybe we give feedback of something like, I know you have so much on your plate right now, so just wanted to give you this heads up that next time you're going to be late to practicum. We like sugarcoat it, and they almost don't even hear that it's a problem. Um, so so in this example where we're essentially saying, hey, I need you to be here on time when you say you're going to be, and we're saying, I know you have a lot going on, just text me if you're going to be late, like it's no big deal, don't worry about it, right? That's our tendency to say something like that. But then what's the outcome sometimes is that your student starts texting you weekly that they're going to be late to practicum, because that's what you've agreed upon now. Just text me if you're going to be late, and it's not a big deal. So then it's hard to say, okay, that's not really what I meant, I want you here on time. It's hard to know like where that line is of enough is enough, where you kind of come out of being empathetic, 100% empathetic, and then bridge that with being able to be direct and give some hard feedback, because we spend a lot of our time in this empathy, advocating, validating type of role a lot of times in our jobs. So sometimes it's hard to balance that out. But a lot of students, not a lot, some students don't get it with subtle hints. Um, so, another one, I think the scheduling, the students being late or not showing up when you think, that happens, not all the time, but maybe a more common problem. Um, Giving a hint of like, hey, if you're going to be late, just wait in my office instead of coming into the morning meeting, because it's just a little bit disruptive, right? You say that to a lot of students, they're going to get it right away, and they're not going to do that again. They're going to be there on time so that they don't, cause any more uncomfortableness, right? And because that's your goal as a supervisor, is to encourage them to be on time. And then maybe you're looking at your calendars to make sure that they're up to date and students know exactly when they're needed for at practicum, for meetings, or whatever that looks like. And you're doing all these good things, but then maybe your student is texting because something unexpected happened and they're still going to be late. And maybe the student couldn't account for it. But after so many times of correcting this behavior, it's really understandable that as a supervisor, you're starting to get frustrated and you're starting to resent your student. And now it's time to talk about expectations. And now we're kind of like dug this big hole, and you feel like you've given this feedback, but it's been in ways that apparently the student isn't understanding as feedback. So one suggestion I would say is I'm trying to be really understanding of your struggles to get here in the morning, but we don't really allow other staff members to come in late to work this often. And I know you don't do this with your other job or with your classes. So I'm just going to either need a commitment from you to be here at one time at the same time every day that you're scheduled. And you know, how do you think we can make this happen? Or what's the consequence if you're not able to be here when you say you will? That feels pretty direct, right? But not in a way that is shaming or resentful. It's saying, has some empathy pieces, but it's also a little bit more direct. Sometimes even that is hard to say because it feels like we're still shaming a student. But really, what we're doing is we're trying to make a plan so that we can get everybody on the same page. And sometimes you can say that too. So it's just important for the student to know that the practicum isn't an afterthought, and your time is just as valuable as theirs. And having professional behavior is only going to serve them in their futures. Uh, so you can even, say that to them of letting them know when they're not there. And to continue with this example, right? When they don't come in the morning, their work has to be picked up by someone else. And they're a valued member of the team and depended on because they do good work when they're here, but it's starting to feel like maybe they don't want to be there, or they're kind of taking this experience for granted. So even following that up with, I know it's hard to hear, but I really think you're a great student, and this issue is getting in the way of the good work I've seen you do. Something like that. Just kind of encouraging them of like, I want to continue to see you doing all this good work, and I want to try to be flexible, but it's important that you and I are both understanding where this boundary is as far as coming in late and the time frame and that professionalism. So that kind of direct feedback is also really helpful to be written down. That way, if there's a goal or some action steps that you're choosing to take, you can kind of keep following up with that. We do have a form that you're welcome to use on our website, or just email one of us in the practicum department and we can email it to you, or we can talk through the situation. I would also encourage, if you are going to do some sort of documentation of feedback given, have the student take notes so that you can really tell that they're understanding the feedback correctly. Especially if you're in the habit of using an agenda every week, have the students start taking notes right away at the beginning. That way, if you do get to a feedback stage, the student is the one writing it down as well. Set some clear expectations with goals, with checkpoints that maybe a student has to meet before moving on. So in the end, students at this kind of level 2 phase aren't just going to bring their insecurities and questions to the table. And typically it just takes a few corrective statements for the student to get it and change. But every once in a while you get a student where it's a little tricky. So also I know that giving tough feedback is really hard for most of us because we don't want to hurt feelings, but addressing issues, setting boundaries and expectations early, often you can avoid a lot of these uncomfortable conversations because most students will change their behavior quickly when confronted with feedback, but others may become a little bit defensive. So allow them an opportunity to share what they're feeling and talk about compromising can be kind of helpful to lessen the blow. So I know that was a lot of information about kind of handling tough cases or giving these feedback, but in a nutshell, the best thing you can do is lay out your expectations early on and talk about how you give feedback early on, so then when it happens, it doesn't come as a surprise. Okay, so level 3, these are the students who are the most comfortable, the most confident, and they also understand the value of feedback. So it's this really nice balance. So they're essentially secure enough in their skills that they're a lot less hesitant to ask for help or to show their insecurities, to talk about when they do feel uncomfortable or anxious or they don't know what to do. They'll bring those to session and welcome the feedback. Because they really crave the feedback, because they want to really improve what they're doing. And they see where their limitations are, and they're ready to try out new skills. So these students typically have a pretty good base of skills to draw upon. For example, they might be really excellent in building rapport with clients or asking for help or implementing suggestions or feedback. A big one, taking notes on new processes. And now they're just really looking on how do they improve. Like they've got these base skills. What's next? Um, and I think that it's really great to supervise these types of students who are eager to learn and eager to improve. They're really easy to cheer on, and they really want your honest opinion. So because of this, it can be hard sometimes to switch over to feedback for growth. So with level 1 and 2 students, typically we're supervising basic skills and expectations, but with level 3 students, they often need more critical thinking and the ability to work out situations without a lot of guidance. So students at a level 3 skill level, I ask a lot of times, what do you think? Of course, I ask this at all the levels, but often students at the higher levels will be able to work it out in a little bit more depth. So this is an opportunity to dive more deeply into ethics or clinical case conceptualizations, to understand or dissect a client's behavior, or to understand the why behind the behavior, or the feeling, really, to influence how your student's working with that client. So really just breaking down the situation in more depth. I also think role playing is important at this level to give in the moment practice and feedback. So role playing can feel overwhelming for levels 1 and 2 because they feel like they're on the spot and critiqued, but level 3 students often see it and appreciate the value in it. And it can also be important to make sure these students are feeling challenged enough. So finding new opportunities for them or giving additional responsibilities can be really great at this stage. And often these students are really eager for the opportunity. So move my picture here. So now that we've talked about all the different skill levels at some length, I wanted to give a few more examples for giving feedback, especially constructive feedback to students. So this is a 6-step method for giving constructive feedback to students that kind of walks through exactly what you want to cover. And I think a lot of us really want to soften the blow, but it kind of leaves us exposed to be so gentle that the student doesn't always recognize that you're giving feedback. So I'm going to give a sample scenario for these examples, one that has happened several times in the past, and I referenced earlier in the training, right? So maybe relatable to some of you. So let's say your student hasn't been showing up when they're expected to, and they keep changing their schedule or agree to be at a meeting and then they don't show up, etc. So for the first step, you're really setting the scene, so to speak, that you have a concern. So make sure you use specific language such as, I have a concern about your attendance and we need to have a conversation about it. So the second step is to give some concrete examples. So avoid saying something like, I'm not always sure what your schedule is, but be specific. Like, I expected you to be at the meeting this morning with our new clients and you weren't there. Or, we agreed that you would start your day at 9 a.m. and today you came in at 9:30. This is very direct, it's to the point, and it shows exactly what you're talking about. So the third step is to describe your reactions. So it's important to let the student know exactly how their behavior impacts you and the agency or other staff members. So for this example, when you say, like, I expected you to be at the meeting with our new clients this morning and you weren't, follow it up with something like, I was just kind of embarrassed because I made the clients wait thinking you were coming, so it just kind of made us look unprofessional. And for the other example of the student showing up 30 minutes later than agreed upon, you could follow that up with something like, I typically don't start my day until you're here so that you can observe what I'm doing. And it's frustrating. It feels like a waste of time for me if you aren't here when we agreed upon, because I don't want to get started without you, because this is really valuable learning stuff for you. So this is usually the hardest step because we have to be vulnerable and kind of expose how we're feeling about it. But also we know it's hard for students to hear that we're kind of disappointed in their behavior. However, it's part of feedback, and it's an important step because it really kind of explains why the behavior is a problem in this certain situation. So if there was no emotion or reaction, attached to the feedback, it just wouldn't feel as serious or impactful. So the fourth step is to give your student an opportunity to respond. Sometimes this happens just by remaining quiet after you share. If not, make sure you directly ask the student something like, what do you think? Or what's your view of the situation? And this is really your opportunity to offer empathy. But remember, your concerns are valid, and your student may have a really good excuse for why they weren't there, but it's also not a free pass. So I'd venture to guess that if you're at this feedback stage of the scenario, this behavior has probably happened more than once. Or it's built up bit by bit to this state. So maybe your student has always been a little bit late and always just kind of laughs it off. But now they're like 30 minutes late routinely, not just 5 or 10 minutes late. So the fifth step is really to offer suggestions. This step is where you can express what your expectations or ideas are on how to make and how to make them attainable. So perhaps this is making a schedule that's more realistic, or putting reminders in your student's calendar, making sure that your student really understands the importance of creating a solution together, which leads us nicely into step 6, which is really summarizing and expressing your support. So make sure they review the plan, and that you review the plan to make sure that the change is happening, and answer questions and end on a positive note, praising the work that your student does, appreciating their ability to take feedback, and your confidence in the situation improving, whatever that needs to look like. It can also be some time where you offer up what you plan to do to help the situation to continue to improve, such as, I realize that you have a lot on your plate, and we can keep those priorities factored into the schedule. I just want to make sure that we're building on your professional skills, as well as the skills that you're learning here at Practicum for social work, and just so that we all have a good experience. So it can be, you can lessen the blow a little bit by just with this final step, just making sure that you're offering a lot of positive encouragement. So finally, I just wanted to make sure that you were all aware of the documentation that we do have through the school in case you need it. So depending on the feedback that you're giving, it might be helpful to have some written documentation of the conversation. So we have a practicum action plan that you can use if you'd like. It's you can find it on our website. It just kind of showed you here where to find it. So in the picture you can see at the Grace Abbott School of Social Work website under the Practicum tab. If you click on Supervisor Forms, you can then click on the level of student that you're supervising. So BSW, MSW Foundation, or MSW Advanced. And there's a list of forms that will come up, and one of them is the Practicum Action Plan. So it's completely up to you how you would like to use it, or if you want to use it, or if it just needs to be a guide for the conversation, or if your agency has one that you would prefer to use, or you've created one that you'd prefer to use, that's fine too. Just as a reminder, following up on the feedback given at your next supervision can be really important. Talking about how it's improving, recognizing the change, praising your student for that, thanking them for that, or if it hasn't changed yet, making sure that we're having a space to address that again as well. So you can, again, go back and follow those same 6 steps if it's not improved at the next supervision. But you can also reach out to your faculty liaison who's assigned to your student, especially if you feel like you're giving feedback, direct feedback, writing down the feedback, whatever that looks like, or maybe you're going to have to give feedback and you're nervous about it. Contact us. We'd be more than happy to lend a hand, talk about some ways of addressing it, being present when you address it, whatever you need. We would be more than happy to assist in that, because at the end of the day, giving feedback is hard, and we don't want you to feel alone in it. So thank you so much. Hopefully this was helpful in addressing different levels of students and also how to give some feedback. Please reach out to the Practicum department if you'd have any questions, or need some help with an issue, or if you have some other ideas of other supervision topics that you would like discussed. Thanks so much.